We've talked a lot about the scenarios of how the Panthers could clinch a playoff spot this season, and all of those scenarios have involved a win and a loss. But you may remember there's another way for a game to end, and yes, I'm talking about a tie. Could a tie possibly over the next 2 weeks help the Panthers win the NFC South? I'll answer that question among other listener questions on this weekly Wednesday mailbag edition of Locked On Panthers.
You are Locked On Panthers, your daily Carolina Panthers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, as always, Julian Council, talking Carolina Panthers with you every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and yes, of course, Friday, your team every day. That's our motto here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Thanks for watching the show right here on YouTube and listening wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Today's episode of Locked On Panthers is sponsored by Prize Picks. Download the Prize Picks app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. It is Wednesday. It is also Christmas Eve. So Merry Christmas tomorrow for all the folks who do celebrate. And of course, here on a Wednesday, even if it is Christmas Eve, as I mentioned, your team every day, I'm here during the regular season, answering your weekly Wednesday mailbag questions. At me, DM me, follow me over on Twitter or over on Blue Sky at Julian Council to get your questions in for next week's New Year's Eve edition of the weekly Wednesday mailbag right here on Locked On Panthers. Got some good questions today before the holiday, so let's go ahead and get into it. We'll start off with Seth, who, man, when I read this, Seth, I was mad at you because I really am so tired of trying to rack my brain to figure out all the scenarios for how Carolina can clinch the division. And back when the wild card was a possibility, I got a lot of it wrong, got some of it right. But here we are. It's all pretty simplified at this point in time. The game against Seattle, it matters. We talked about it yesterday, but it doesn't matter as much as the game next week against Tampa. If you just beat the Bucs one more time, you're in the playoffs, or a win this Saturday and this Sunday rather, and a win against the Seahawks this Sunday and the Bucs losing, then you're in that way. But really, it's going to probably come down to the Week 18 matchup down in Tampa Bay, Florida. But Seth, he had to ask about ties. He said, at the risk of making your head explode thinking about all the tiebreakers, I do want to ask this question. Is there a scenario where a tie game for either the Panthers or Bucs over the next 2 weeks can help the Panthers make the playoffs? I know ties are rare, but this is the NFL, and anything can happen. I hadn't seen or heard anyone mention what would happen in the event of a tie game for either team over the next 2 weeks. So I was curious to see if a tie could affect anything at all. Well, Seth, yes, it could. And yes, it will if it happens. So here's one scenario. If the Panthers tied this Sunday against Seattle and Tampa lost, Carolina would be then sitting at 8-7-1, while Tampa would be at 7-9. A loss the following week to the Buccaneers have Carolina at 8-8-1, and Tampa at 8-9. So right then and there, they would have clinched. And I would think too, like a tie. Is it a win or a tie? Is a clinch scenario this Sunday for Carolina? Because in that scenario, win or a tie and a Tampa loss, even if you lose in Tampa, as I just mentioned there, you're in. So yeah, a tie could help the Panthers this week as long as the Buccaneers lose. If the Panthers won this week to get to 9-7 and the Bucs lost this, or tied rather, this week to get to 7-8-1, and then the Panthers lost to Tampa next week, Carolina would be 9-8, Tampa would be 8-8-1. So yeah, there are several scenarios. Think about even this week, if say Carolina wins this week, Tampa wins this week, the Panthers then are at 9-7, Tampa's at 8-1, and if Carolina then loses next week, or ties rather against Tampa next week, they're 9-7-1, while Tampa would be 8-8-1. So yeah, a tie either this week or next week could be enough to get the Carolina Panthers into the playoffs and have won the NFC South. So even as I was saying that out loud, having some of it written down, others just trying to make up in my head, still kind of stumbled and fumbled and bumbled through it. So thank you, Seth, for asking that question about ties. But yes, a tie can help the Panthers get into the playoffs, especially considering that they're already a game ahead of Tampa Bay at this point in time. And of course, they have the head-to-head at this point. But really, being a game ahead of them, that's what would help them in this scenario. All right, so that was the kind of fun, positive outlook. Now we got a couple of questions coming up where y'all are a little concerned, especially with the one Xavier Legette. Hans asking, do we need to have an honest conversation about Xavier Legette? I know the Panthers used a first-round pick on him, but he is so obviously not an NFL wide receiver. Those are your words, Hans, not mine at this point, and that has to be brought up. Jalen Coker is clearly number 2, but if Canales thinks Coker is better in the slot, we have to consider putting Bryson Tremaine out wide just to have a receiver who's a viable option. Gus saying, are we to the point of having to tell ourselves that the Panthers drafted Jalen Coker in the first round and then grabbed Jonathan Mingo? I mean, Xavier Legette after the draft. Woo, buddy, y'all are mean. Xavier Legette is an NFL wide receiver. He is. Let's not sit here and pretend like the guy hasn't made plays before. He is an NFL receiver. Jalen Coker has obviously been really solid for them. Has he played to the level of a number one, or I guess a first-round pick? Well, if you're comparing him to Xavier Legette, sure. If you're comparing to Tetairoa McMillan, no, clearly not. He ain't on the same level at this point in time, but he's been a good player for them. Invoking the name Jonathan Mingo, oh, man, that's a lot. So looking at XL's season, it obviously has not yielded the kind of results. To this point, there's still 2 more games left in the regular season, potentially playoffs ahead of you. So let's wait and see. But up until this point, 15 games in, he's missed 2 of them, but 31 receptions, 338 yards, 3 touchdowns. You were hoping for a lot more than that. His 35.6 receiving success rate actually ranks 136 out of 139 pass catchers in the NFL and is last in the NFL among wide receivers. The league average, by the way, is 51.3, so well below that. Looking over at PFF, his overall grade is a 53.5. That's 121st out of 131 wide receivers in the NFL this season. Last year's overall grade was a 59.1, so he has certainly regressed as far as his overall grade according to PFF. But more importantly, you got to compare him to the guys that went around his territory. Now, you look at last year, the 2024 NFL draft, 9 wide receivers were taken in the top 34 picks. XL ranks last in receiving yards among those 9 players, and he is 7th in receptions among that group. Now, there were guys like Keon Coleman, who's been a healthy scratch multiple times this season up there in Buffalo. XL's not had those kind of issues. Only time he's missed games has been because of injury. And Dave Canales even asked on Monday about his belief in Xavier and whether he should maintain his starting spot. He said he's not in jeopardy, that they're going to continue to go to him. They're going to continue to trust him. And they're watching practice. I can go out there every once in a while, but we're not seeing really anything going on other than them stretching in individual drills, some special teams period, and some scout team stuff, but not a ton of like what they're actually going to be working on in game. And clearly they are seeing enough in the meeting room, in the film room, and out on the practice field, and I suppose on game day, to where he wants to continue to go to Xavier Legette. And this is a guy coming into it, I feel like a lot of people needed to understand this, and I try to convey this. At South Carolina, he didn't do anything until that Gator Bowl down in Jacksonville against Notre Dame. Then that next season, I was there inside Bank of America Stadium when he went off against North Carolina in a game where South Carolina still gave up 9 sacks, 16 tackles for loss, and got their ass kicked. But he was not the problem that day for the Gamecocks. He was really good, and that was just the beginning of an all-SEC caliber season. Now, Juice Wells being injured, that certainly helped, but he took advantage of the opportunity that he had ahead of him right there in his 5th year at South Carolina. There was, of course, a little moped, scooter accident, obviously the loss of his parents, which I am sensitive to. You think about the quarterback changes, coaching changes. There's a lot of things that were going on down there in college. Now, I'll say this. That, aside from the death of your parents, is a commonplace for everybody in college nowadays, with the different quarterbacks, the different coordinators, the different coaches. All that's changing every single year in college football. So you can't really use that as an excuse moving forward. But I've maintained back then, yesterday on the show, and today, he's not going to get 5 years to show out. They're not going to give him the 5th-year option if he continues to perform the way he performed last year and this year. If this is the production that he's putting out there next season, I don't see why it would be a financially prudent decision for the Carolina Panthers front office to then back in May of 2027 at this point in time, why would they would want to exercise the fifth-year option. So he has to be better. And even looking more into how he compares to that group of other 9 receivers taking the top 34 picks. Yeah, he's not Marvin Harrison Jr. He's not Roma Dunze. He's obviously not Malik Neighbors. Like those guys, maybe not fair, but you look at Xavier Worthy, Keon Coleman, who's been really up and down. Ladd McConkey, clearly a better player. Ricky Pearsall. And you also look at Brian Thomas Jr. Like those guys are kind of more in his range. He's still, just looking at all of them, his EPA per target is a negative 0.02. He's the only drafted wide receiver in the first 34 picks with a negative EPA per target. The next closest player is Roma Dunze up in Chicago. He has a 0.19. So that is far away from the rest of those guys. So, yeah, XL's not been good, but it's his second year. And this was always, in my opinion, when they took him, a player that was going to take some time to really get up to speed before he was going to ever make a major impact, if he ever does at all in the NFL. I never saw him as a number one guy. I did not like the selection. Now, I was somebody who thought Keon Coleman was the right guy, and Keon has obviously had his issues up in Buffalo, but the production tells you he's been a better player. Some of the things going on off the field have told you maybe he's not a fit to the culture that they're building here in Carolina that they have right now in Carolina. But Xavier Legette, that guy, when it matters most as far as what you do on the field, he's not getting it done. And eventually, the Panthers are going to have to do something about that. Now, it's a good thing that they have McMillan, because if they did not have him this year, they would have been royally screwed at wide receiver based off of the injuries to Coker, trading away Adam Thielen, and, of course, XL not developing the way that they probably hoped he would this season. But they have Jalen Coker as well. So you at least have those two guys. Jimmy Horn Jr. has been promising in the reps that he's gotten. Bryson Tremaine, I don't see as a viable option on the outside. I'm sorry, Hans. That's not where I'm at. But you have two guys who you know you can count on. A third in Horn, who is getting opportunities. We'll see how that progresses throughout his career as a 6th-round pick this past April. But Legette needs to be better. And they really cannot have missed on this guy in the first round. You're looking at last year, Legette, Brooks have not made the impacts that you were hoping. Brooks has barely even played, while Legette has played, but not given you nearly enough, in my opinion. So we'll see how that plays out as far as the next 2 weeks, potentially the playoffs, and of course in 2026, which will be a big season for Xavier Legette here in Carolina. Rico Dowdle, y'all were saying you got to extend Rico. You can't not have Rico be here next year. And since then, he really hasn't done much. So someone's asking, is it time to reevaluate Rico Dowdle's usage? Sure, we'll do that here in just a moment on the Locked On Panthers. This episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. The holiday season is one of the best times for sports, bowl games, big basketball matchups, playoff pushes. It's all happening at once. And while we're all making choices every day, one of the most fun places to make the right call is Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the easiest way to get in on daily fantasy. Just pick more or less on at least 2 player projections, lock in your lineup, and you're in the game. It's fast, simple, and available in 45 states, including California, Texas, North Carolina, and in South Carolina as well. Prize Picks has added an extra layer of excitement to the holiday sports schedule. Creating a lineup takes less than a minute, and the app makes the whole process smooth and intuitive. Deposits and withdrawals are quick and easy, which keeps everything flowing. Download the Prize Picks app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 in limes after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNFL. You get $50 in limes after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks. It's good to be right. It's fair to say that in the middle of this season, Rico Dowdle saved the Carolina Panthers. Go back to that game against Miami. Carolina's down 17-0. Yes, Bryce Young made a critical play there on that 4th down to find Tetairoa McMillan. Then he, on that trust throw, he found Xavier Legette in the end zone to keep Carolina in it there in the first half. But really, the engine to that win on that Sunday was Rico Dowdle. The next Sunday against Dallas, Rico Dowdle, once again, Rico was the man. From week 9 or week 5 to 9, he was awesome for the Panthers, one of the best backs, maybe the best back in the NFL. But since then, has not really gone that way. Nathaniel, wants to ask now, do you think it's time to reevaluate Rico Dowdle's usage? He looks so much worse. Sorry, looks much worse. My bad. Sorry for embellishing. He looks much worse than his 2 big games against mediocre defenses, and Chuba seems to have more pep in his step. All right, going back to the numbers. Week 5 through 9, Rico Dowdle rushed for 652 yards, 6.3 yards per carry, which both led the National Football League. He was 4th in EPA per rush and had a 50.5% rushing success rate. Since then, Rico Dowdle has rushed for 272 yards. He has 3.2 yards per carry. Both of those rank 30th and 48th, respectively, among 49 qualifying rushers. He has a negative 0.14 EPA per rush. That is 42nd out of 49 qualifying rushers. And then he has a 26.7% rushing success rate. So a steep drop-off in total yards, half. He's cut his yards per carry in half from 6.3 to 3.2. EPA per rush is significantly down. And of course, the rushing success rate also been basically cut in half from 15.5% to 26.7% as well. And you look at Chuba and you bring that up, Nathaniel. He really has, yes, I guess, had more of a pep in his step, where since week 10, he has 190 yards compared to Rico's 272. He has 4.6 yards per carry compared to 3.2 for Rico. He has a negative 0.01 EPA per rush compared to a negative 0.14 EPA per rush. He has a 43.9 success rate compared to 26.7% success rate. So he might not be getting the same amount of carries in usage, and he does not have the same amount of total yardage. When if you just look at some of the other factors like yards per carry, EPA per rush, success rate, he is actually outperforming him in all of those categories right now. Now, interesting thing is looking at the snap count since week 10. You go from Rico 42 to Chuba 11, 66 for Rico, Chuba 15, 30 to 16, 27 to 38 in favor of Chuba, 34, 24, 31, 22. Really, over the last 3 weeks, you've seen there be more of a balance as far as the usage for Rico in these games. He's gone from being that feature back those first couple of weeks to there being far more of a split. And Dave Canales has talked about this in his press conferences, how they like Chuba as their third down back. And you've seen more of a rotation that makes a lot more sense than you get this drive, you get that drive, and so on and so forth, which we saw there for those 2 weeks, which didn't really make a ton of sense for Carolina as then they went to Rico. But since that's really happened outside of like the Green Bay game, last 6 games, he has rushed for less than 60 yards in each of them. Now, he has made some plays like against Atlanta out of the backfield, not nearly a touchdown reception there at the end of that game. He's still been very paramount to helping them win games, but he has not been really the engine like he was in the middle part of the season against Miami, against Dallas, and even against Green Bay on the road in that win. So they already kind of have addressed his usage, and this just goes to show y'all you can't take too much from 1 or 2 game sample size. He was excellent for those 2 weeks. He really was. And they needed him to be as Chuba was banged up and wasn't out there. But y'all, it's a 17-game season. It's not a 2-game season. It's not a 4-game season. It's not a 5-game season. It's 17 games. What do you do across those 17 games? And what Rico has done has been really good when you consider what they paid him and what they're going to having to pay him based off of the incentives that he has clicked off this year or checked off this season. So good for him for the way he's performed, but do they need to extend him? I don't think so. But again, once the season's over, we're gonna have more of a conversation about this, but hopefully this is kind of a lesson that let's not freak out over just 2 games and recognize that they already have a running back on a long-term deal in Chuba Hubbard. They just drafted one in Trevor Etienne, and they have another one in Jonathan Brooks that they would still like to see what he can do here. And all that, I think, would go ahead of paying another running back in Rico Dowdle. So we'll see what happens, but it was fun, but it doesn't need to be more than that right now when you look at Rico. All right, let's take one more quick pause. I'll come back here and answer the rest of your weekly Wednesday mailbag questions here on Locked On Panthers. On Monday, during the good, the bad, and the ugly, you pointed out the good part of the win on Sunday was the Panthers rookie class. They have all contributed in some way this season, including in a big way on Sunday. And one of those guys was Nick Scourton. Kurt now asking me about the rookie out of A&M by way of Purdue, but he's from down there in Bryan, Texas. Kurt asking, what is Nick Scourton's ceiling? Sunday against Tampa felt like his best game of the season, and he's shown some leadership characteristics earlier in the year. I feel like this was a home run draft pick, even if he's not an elite pass rusher that's going to get 12 sacks a year. Yeah, Kurt, I think that Scourton is a good player and is going to be a really good player for them moving forward. And you look at PFF as far as his grade on Sunday, it was a 77.9. That's the second highest grade that he's had this season, only behind the grade he had back in Miami in week 5, where I believe he was grading out in the 90s, which is elite. But he has really, I think, made a big impact as far as just not only contributing, because he's talked about this on Sunday, how he's gotten more burn throughout the season, which has been a necessity, as you've seen with Pat Jones being out for the rest of the season with that back injury. Of course, TJ Wooden's been out there. Prince McMillan, you've seen his snaps kind of reduce in recent weeks, I think in large part because of all that Nick can do, not just as a guy who can set the edge, stop the run, but as a pass rusher as well. I think his biggest impact moving forward is going to be, as you mentioned, his leadership. That's a guy, after, I want to say it was the Bills game, who was talking to us in the locker room. And again, these guys don't have to talk to us after Sunday. They will be available typically on Monday, and we can talk to them then. I'm not making a big deal about it at all. But usually when they get blown out, it's JC Horn, it's Derek Brown. Bryce has to talk to us. They come to the podium. Maybe Rosebud might stick around, but not a lot of guys are trying to have any conversation with us after they get their tails kicked. But he was willing to talk to us after the Buffalo game. And it's either Buffalo or it's either New Orleans. Either way, a tough loss. And that was impressive to me that, okay, this is a rookie and he's sticking around. Like, he wants to sit here. He wants to have a conversation like why things did not go the right way, what they need to do moving forward to maintain focus, to prevent some things like that from happening again. Now, if it was, of course, the New Orleans game that he spoke to us, they did not prevent that, as we all know. But I think his leadership traits, that is what's going to really be the most impactful thing about having Nick Scourton here in Carolina for the years to come. And I still think that he can be a really good player as well. And I think about the scrum this past Sunday that we had there with him after the win against Tampa. And it got DJ Wooden walking out of the locker room. I kind of caught eyes with him, and he was not in pointing like that guy right there. Like, that's the future. That guy's the truth. And yeah, he's good. He's a good ass player, man. And he's wonderful to talk to. A really impressive young man, which makes you sound old as hell saying that. But I mean, he's still kind of a kid. But he kind of reminds me a lot of Jared Verse. I think when Nick's a little bit bigger than Jared by like 20 so pounds. But Verse is just an unbelievable leader. He was at Florida State back when he transferred there from Albany, and like Purdue, Albany, not the same thing, but a guy who clearly was kind of unheralded coming out of high school, who went to a smaller school. Purdue's huge, but went to like a less heralded kind of program, and then went to another school and really helped them. Now, A&M didn't go undefeated last year. I understand that, but Scourton was a first-team All-SEC player. He was a leader in that locker room, and Jared Verse was much the same at FSU. That year they went undefeated, and then last year he was Defensive Rookie of the Year. Now, obviously, that's not going to be what Nick Scourton achieves this season, but I just think as far as their leadership characteristics, those two guys, I really find them comparable from all that I've read about Verse, even heard about Verse, and then of course everything I've observed so far from Nick Scourton this season. And you look at their numbers, Verse only had 4.5 sacks last year. Right now, 3.5 sacks for Scourton. Verse has 6.5 this season. So Jared Verse is not even up there to that point where he's a 12-sack guy. And maybe he will never be that for LA. I don't know. But that's still a guy who made a major impact as a rookie without having a high sack total. And you look at Nick Scourton making a pretty major impact as a rookie without a high sack total. Would love for him to be that version for Carolina, be that Jared Verse basically for Carolina moving forward. All right, Tanner, final question here asking, Tetairoa McMillan is the best Panthers draft pick since who? Probably JC Horn in terms of the value where you got him, which was there in the top 10, and then the production that you're getting from him. Even if JC did get hurt as a rookie, but just even reduction thereafter, and then just projecting on where he'll probably continue to go in his career. So I would think just as far as all that goes, where he's taken, what he's produced so far, looking ahead, yeah, T-Mac, I think would probably be the best draft pick they've had, especially like early in the draft in the first round since JC getting named to a second straight Pro Bowl on Tuesday. If here's another way, if you're asking me about year one production at wide receiver, then very clearly he's the best than they've had since Kelvin Benjamin when he set the Panthers rookie receiving record in yardage. And then if you want to look at just like, okay, he's winning an award, the last time the Panthers had any rookie win player of the year, or rookie of the year rather, that was 2012 with Luke Kuechly. And looking over at FanDuel, the odds are for Tetairoa McMillan to be the offensive rookie of the year. Now, it is actually pretty insane. Tyler Shuck is right behind him. Now, Shuck has only played 5 games now. And I know New Orleans is playing really well. He just threw for 300 yards. If Tyler Shuck comes out of nowhere to snake McMillan for that award, then all these NFL awards are just a waste of time because it's just basically quarterback rookie of the year, most valuable quarterback. Like I don't see how you can come out of nowhere and win that award, but we'll see what the voters decide to do. But that's going to wrap up this edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast, part of Locked On Podcast Network, hosted by yours, Julian Council. Again, y'all subscribe or follow the show free over on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. And be sure to follow me, Julian Council, over on Twitter and Blue Sky at Julian Council, where again, I'll be back next Wednesday on New Year's Eve, answering your weekly Wednesday mailbag questions. All you got to do is at me or DM me over on Twitter or over on Blue Sky at Julian Council to get those questions into me after the game on Sunday. In the meantime, be safe, be happy, be whole. As always, keep pounding. And, of course, have a Merry Christmas because, again, your team every day. I'll be back here tomorrow with Corbin Smith of Locked On Seahawks. No, we're not going to be recording the episode on Christmas Eve. We're not going to be recording the episode on Christmas Day, but you'll be getting it on Christmas Eve on YouTube and, of course, on Christmas Day, wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. So tune in to all that here on Christmas Day on Locked On Panthers.